Actually, didn't Keeley do a really good job with this? Because I just wanted it to look like one of those like little cheap humor paperbacks.
Yeah, yeah.
It's perfect, you know?
Yeah. No, she always does a great job.
Yeah, she's awesome. After I read through all the Complete Peanuts volumes that I have, I then read this book, and that's what made me want to ask you about this.
Oh, yeah.
The interview. Also, the collection that you guys have coming out, which I think is just out, right?
Yeah, in fact.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye. Hi.
So long. You know what? We didn't have a copy of it. I thought you had a copy of it.
I don't. I have a PDF.
Maybe you should get a copy and interview me after you've seen it.
Well, no, I have a PDF of it that I just got from Emily that I kind of went through it, but I didn't really.
God, look at this fucker.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
It really is.
Yeah, I need to get like a physical copy of that. I can't read stuff on the screen.
Yeah, it's beautifully done.
And is it the same interviews that are in this book? The conversations?
No. Well, you know, I let them reproduce my interview.
Yeah.
Which I've had second and third and fourth thoughts about. You know, it's the University of Mississippi Press. I mean, they do great work in these interview books, and they're always coming to me because we printed so many interviews in the Comics Journal. But you know, they don't pay a penny, so you're just giving them the interview, and then you're giving them interviews that we will possibly eventually publish, like the Schulz interview. So my interview appears in that book, but it also appears in this book, along with 3 other interviews, one of which has never been published anywhere, by Lori Call. Have you read the book yet?
No.
Okay. You have a PDF of it?
I have a PDF. I just kind of went through it. I didn't get a chance to really read it yet.
Well, the one interview that's never been published before was by Lori Colwyn. Do you know who that is?
No.
She's a novelist, and she's a really terrific novelist. She's done about 6 or 7 books. I've read about 3 of them, and some years ago. And she writes about contemporary. She writes mostly about relationships, marriages, relationships, breakups, and she writes she really drills down. So there's an existential depth to her work, but there's also a lightness of touch to it, and it's this beautiful balancing act. And she's just a lovely writer, observant and trenchant, but also light. So I don't know how she does that. But somehow she befriended Charles Schulz, and I don't know quite how that happened. And then I learned that she interviewed him, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 hours of interviews with Schulz. And then nothing happened to them, and then she died. She committed suicide, actually, I think.
Wow.
And but she apparently was fairly close to him, because if you read her interview with Schulz, it's unlike any other interview. And I think it's because she was not a comics fan per se. She was not a comics critic. She was not a comics scholar. But she appreciated the forum up to a point, and she was close friends with Schulz. So she was able to ask him questions that only someone in that position would be able to ask.
Yeah.
And so it was an entirely different kind of an interview. I thought it was really interesting and revealing because of the questions she could ask and their obvious closeness and his willingness to answer those questions. So
how did you get a hold of that interview?
I heard about. I think I heard about it. Let me think. How did I learn about the interview? I think that the Schulz Museum had a copy of it.
Oh, okay.
And I might have learned about it through Jeannie Schulz. Either I heard about it and contacted her, or Jeannie contacted me and said we had this interview, and I forget which. But they actually had the tapes.
Oh.
And so Jeannie sent me the tapes and we transcribed them. But they've had these tapes for a couple of decades. I think the interviews were done actually in the 80s, so they've had them longer than that. And they, you know, and there was nothing being done with them.
Hmm.
They're just sitting in the archives.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
cool.
it was a great find. So then I had to, you know, so we transcribed them, and they really, in the interview, kind of really forms the bedrock of the book. I mean, partly because my interviews already appeared a couple of times, once in the University of Mississippi book and once in the Journal.
Yeah, but 20 years ago now. I mean, this book is from 2000, I think, or 2001 maybe.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's still in print.
I'm sure. So you said in I think in the Fantagraphics book that you never paid much attention to Peanuts until the 90s.
Well, yeah, what I meant by that was that, I mean, I read it. I mean, I read it when I was a kid. I was, you know, aware of it, of course. But I wasn't paying close attention to Peanuts when I was getting more deeply involved in comics as a literary form. And I mean, I'm not sure this will be of any interest to you or anybody else, but the reason for that, I think, is because from the age of 21 or 22, I became militantly an advocate for comics as a literary form, and I wanted to see comics become the equivalent of literary works.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, Peanuts was a newspaper strip, and, you know, I recognized it was terrific, but it wasn't the kind of comics that I was envisioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, you know, I mean, it was there, and it's, you know, and it just becomes part of the landscape, and you don't, I mean, I didn't pay that much attention to it. And, you know, there weren't that many books, collections of Peanuts. They were all pretty lousy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were always fragmented books that were kind of half-assed, so I didn't pay too much attention to them. And I did not read comics in the newspaper. I mean, I just didn't read the daily newspaper comics.
That was the comic strip world was a different clubhouse than comic books.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I was aware of Doonesbury, and I was aware of the better comics that were being published in the 70s and 80s and so on, but, you know, they weren't the kinds of comics that I was championing.
Mm-hmm. Is that what the general consensus was? Like the whole comics community at that time? Like everybody just kind of felt like Peanuts is, you know, basically like Coca-Cola or something. Like you just kind of, it's just there, and you kind of take it for granted, or?
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I think it was taken for granted. I mean, it was taken for granted by me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, possibly for unique reasons, but in general, I think it was taken for granted. You know, it was. I mean, you know, Charles Schulz won Reuben Awards, and he was recognized by his peers. And of course, you know, it appeared in a huge number of papers, so it was an enormous, phenomenal success. But I think a strip like that, just by virtue of it being around for so long, can be taken for granted.
Yeah.
And, you know, I met Charles Schulz in 1987 when, and this interview is in the book too, the comics historian Rick Marshall, great comics historian, made a date with Schulz to interview him. And he just asked me if I'd like to come along. And I said, sure. But I hadn't reread Peanuts. I hadn't, you know, refamiliarized myself with it. I thought it would just be interesting to meet Charles Schulz. That was in '87. So I basically tagged along with Rick, and we drove up to Santa Rosa and met Schulz, and we sat in a studio, and Rick did most of the interview, and you'll find that I just started poking my nose into it beginning like in the second half. I was pretty quiet for the first half, and then I became more active. And then, I mean, that was a great experience. I enjoyed meeting him, and I enjoyed listening to him. But it wasn't until sometime in the 90s when I realized, you know, I should start paying more attention to this strip. It's, you know, obviously a classic strip, and I haven't been paying enough attention to it. Then I started collecting all the books and started reading them. And that really opened my eyes to how great it was.
Yeah.
And then I interviewed him in 97, so I interviewed him 10 years later.
Was it seen as like kind of a, you know, it's like this strip that people are taking for granted, and then you have artists like Seth or Chris Ware who really appreciate this comic. Was that just kind of like a almost like a hipster thing to do, to be like, no, you guys don't understand. Like when you hear them talking about how Peanuts is a great strip in the 90s, you're just like, what? Like what Peanuts is? Like, what do you?
Well, I think they were, I mean, I think they were genuinely appreciative of the strip. So I don't think they were pretending to like it due to any hipster reasons. And God knows Seth would make the worst hipster in the world, you know.
Yeah.
But no, I think artists like Seth and Ivan Brunetti and others, you know, they were just a little bit ahead of the curve from where I was.
Yeah.
Because I was so, you know, I was so kind of single-mindedly obsessed with putting out new work and discovering new cartoonists who would embody my vague vision of what comics ought to be. You know, I mean, artists like Joe Sacco and Jim Woodring, and, you know, of course, you know, the Hernandez brothers and Dan and so on. You know, and also being obsessed with underground comics, which I saw as the, you know, kind of the benchmark for when comics evolved into a form of self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and before that, comics as a form of self-expression was real hit and miss. I mean, Schulz would have been one of them, but, you know, but there were really very few comics that were self-consciously acts of self-expression.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you could certainly say Crazy Cat was.
Oh, sure.
But, you know, but even great strips like, you know, Little Nemo or
Gasoline Alley.
or Seagar's Popeye or Gasoline Alley. I mean, even those worked within certain parameters, certain commercial parameters, and the artists, I think, saw themselves as commercial artists. And it wasn't until and in comic books you had people like Carl Barks and John Stanley and Harvey Kurtzman, but again there were very few. And or you had someone like Bernie Krigstein, who actually was very conscious of his trying to be an artist, trying to be a genuine artist within this highly restrictive commercial form. You know, but that was very rare. And I don't know where I was going with that, except that, you know, underground comics was actually the first movement where all of the artists thought of themselves as artists. So I was focused on them and what they were, and they were all still very active at that time. And we started publishing a lot of their work. So I was just more focused on that. And Peanuts was almost too legitimate, you know, in a way. And you know, and I was looking for something that was not necessarily transgressive in an odious way, but was transgressive relative to the history of comics.
Yeah.
It was getting out of that, you know, just getting out of that whole banal template of what comics historically were.
And you had to, I mean, basically back then it's like all the comic books would be like, you know, Jim Starlin, like all the superhero stuff, and then you're just trying to find something that seems like an honest expression of that's like being done within this medium.
Yeah. And of course, I was completely averse to that stuff.
Yeah.
And what I was looking for is the diametrical opposite of it. You know, and so in a way, you know, for a long time, Peanuts went under my radar because it was too mainstream.
Yeah. Well,
And then when I thought I should interview Charles Schulz, I bought every book I could and studied them and made notes. I mean, I must have made an interview date with Sparky. I must have contacted him and asked him if he'd be willing to be interviewed, and he said yes. And so then I started my research project, and I read everything I could, which wouldn't have been everything because there wasn't everything available. But I remember spending like 6 months, reading everything, every Peanut strip I could get a hold of, and reading every interview with Schulz, and reading every essay that Schulz wrote about cartooning.
Jeez.
And so I created this gigantic binder, which I think I have here somewhere. And I had tabs. I mean, I had subject matter, tabs, topics, essays, interviews, strips themselves that I thought were particularly relevant with notes written on them. So I came to a studio when I interviewed him in '97 with this gigantic binder full of stuff, which was why, if you read the interview, which was why I was able, he would say something and it made a connection, and I would go in my binder and I would like find a quote from him that I remember that he said, and that's how I was able to do that.
And you said that he, a lot of artists had kind of canned responses to, is this the same interview basically over and over and over again that they'd be doing throughout their career? And they had canned responses, but Schulz really gave you, he like kind of opened up and was more personal with you in his interview. And it really was a conversation.
I think we had a really good rapport. I mean, I think we liked each other. I only met him that once before, and he might not even have remembered that. I'm not sure. I think he might have said he did, but I'm not sure he did. I mean, I'm not sure I made an impression, and so I didn't really know him. I talked to him on the phone a couple of times before I flew down there. But he didn't really know me. But we got along really well, and I spent all day with him. He gave me the whole day. And
you gave him Fantagraphics stuff at first, right? Before you went down there, didn't you familiarize him with your?
I'm sure I did. Yeah.
It would have been Crumb, I guess, or something. What would you have said to Schulz?
It probably was, probably Crumb. I mean, he actually liked Crumb. He liked Crumb's work.
Oh, I'm shocked by that.
I know. Well, I went in with some presuppositions that he happily shattered. Like he liked Fellini. Like, well, I'm not sure I would have known that. He did not like Norman Mailer, which I guess you could have assumed. But we talked about all these things, and so I said, yeah, I did send him books, and I sent him some comics journals. I'm sure I sent him a pile of comics journals. And so, but that, that's basically what he knew of me. But he did give me all day. Most of it was spent in his studio, and then we drove to the ice rink. And then we sat in the cafe at the ice rink for about an hour and a half, and talked some more. And I taped that. I wrote my tape recorder in, and that was a lot looser. It wasn't sort of part of the formal interview where I had all my, I had my binder, I had my questions and all that. We were just kind of shooting a shit, and that was really pleasant. And when I say we drove from his studio to the ice rink, it's about 1,000 yards, or it's maybe a little. It's like it might be a quarter of a mile. But he drove me there in his Jaguar. That was kind of great.
Well, so you went to his studio first, right? And
yeah,
and I read Jeannie Schulz was talking about his process of how he would work, and he would wait for the ink to dry. So he would be working on several strips at the same time. He'd ink in one panel, and then he'd set that one aside to let the ink dry, and he'd take another page. So he had strips that were like in the process for maybe a week or something, just kind of around. Is that something you witnessed when you were there?
Oh yeah. He would have them taped on his drawing board. He had a really, a sizable drawing board, and he would have, as I recall, he had a number of strips on it. Maybe one strip he was working on, but other strips that he was in, he was finishing off. But yeah, he would work on 3 to 5 daily strips at the same time. Wow. Because he would be thinking through a week's worth of strips. He rarely thought of one strip at a time. And I don't think he liked doing gag strips. I think he liked doing short continuities. So he would need to project and figure out where this thing was going. And then he had to figure out how to actually have some sort of gag or tagline after, you know, at the end of every strip, at the last panel of every strip, throughout, you know, a 5-strip sequence or a 10-strip sequence or whatever he was working on. So I think that's why he had to work on multiple days at the same time. Yeah. And he had lots of stuff strewn around the studio.
And were you very conscious, like self-conscious of not kind of poking around his studio and just kind of trying to be respectful, but at the same time being like, oh, what's this over here? What books does he have on his shelf?
I was real careful at the time to look at all of his books, you know. And now, of course, I can't remember any of them, but I mean, I remember a couple of Wyeth books that he had there because he was big on Wyeth. But no, whenever I go into someone's studio or someone's house, I pay attention to the books, you know, just to what they're interested in, because I think that's part of who they are. So I did. I mean, I was as observant as I could be without, you know, being too nosy about it. But you know, I wanted to be respectful, and you know, it was a little intimidating interviewing this legend. And he was by then a legend. I mean, I'll tell you one funny story. I would call him Mr. Schulz because I thought that was, you know, the proper address. And at some point he stopped me and he said, "Call me Sparky." I couldn't feel that familiar. It just felt wrong. So the next time I addressed him, I referred to him again as Mr. Schulz. And I was asking him a question or something, and uncharacteristically, he stopped me in the middle of a sentence, and he said, "Sparky."
Wow. What's that?
And he was very firm about that.
Yeah. Huh.
So from then on, I called him Sparky.
When you went into the ice arena with him, like, what could you tell? Like, I would just imagine like all the employees that are working there are just like, oh, the boss is here or something, you know, or like. No,
it wasn't like that at all. It was just like, you know, good to see you. How you doing? I mean, I think he might have gone there every night.
Oh, really?
And you know, I mean, this can rarely be said truthfully of most people, but you know, he was a regular guy in a certain way. You know, he did not have any pretensions. And I think the people who worked there genuinely liked him. I mean, that's my impression.
Yeah, but how is he not getting bothered by people that are just there to skate? You know, like the parents that are around.
I don't remember any of that happening.
Well,
I mean, I think you have to remember that. I mean, everyone in Santa Rosa probably knew him or knew of him, or you know, knew the rink or knew where he worked, and probably were pretty respectful of his piece. I mean, you know, I don't think people who didn't know him were necessarily going to walk up to him and ooh and ah. But you know, I think, you know, a couple of people probably waved at him, and you know, I mean, it's like he knew people, and you know, who came to the rink, and you know, and the rink serves, you know, hot dogs and hamburgers and stuff like that. There were a few people sitting around.
And he ate there every morning, or I guess that was like.
I don't know if he ate there every morning. You know, and I guess I said he might have dropped by there every night on the way out of the studio, but I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure why I think that, but he certainly didn't seem like, no one treated him like a celebrity. I mean, everyone treated him like he belonged there, and that he was just you know, a nice guy.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was interesting about, I think he said about his childhood, I can't remember if this is in your interview or just in another interview, but he talks about how he wanted to be a part of the correspondence school. His father was a barber, and his father, the profit of that was 11 cents.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
So, and then I looked that up in the 1940s. The equivalent today is $2.05 in our year.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So he had to cut all that hair, and pay, because he paid for Charles to go through the correspondence school on like a monthly, and maybe that was $50 or something a month. I can't remember what it was a month. No, it couldn't have been that much.
It was probably less than that, but
and
yeah.
Maybe?
Well, they were, you know, I mean, I know that Sparky said he felt middle class.
Hmm.
And they probably were. I mean, his father did own the barber shop and was an entrepreneur. His dad owned a car,
Yeah.
which not everyone owned at that time.
But that's
So
a
I
lot
think
of,
he felt like they were somewhere in the middle class.
they lived in an apartment above the barber shop, right?
Yeah, yeah. Now they lived there. They might have lived in a house later, but they did live in the apartment above the barber shop. Yeah.
And they tore that building down recently. Do you know that?
Did they?
Yeah.
Should have been a monument.
I know, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
I heard that his kids went and got the barbershop pole off the building before it was
Wow.
gone. So I guess the barbershop pole is in the Schulz Museum.
Is it? Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Have you been to the Schulz Museum?
I haven't yet. I'd love to as soon as the world opens up again.
Yeah, you should go. It's beautiful. They have a space in it that's reserved. It's a facsimile of Sparky's studio. So they recreated his studio, or at least a portion of it, with his drawing board. And and the whole museum is really beautifully done.
Is it interesting walking into that museum and seeing
Yeah.
that studio and being like, I was here. This looks just like it did when I was a.
Yeah. I mean, it is eerie, you know, in a good way. I mean, it brings back that sense of, and now, you know, where his studio is the administrative office of Creative Associates.
Hmm.
And I guess I'm trying to think if I've been in the space where his studio was after his death. I think I have been. And, you know, they kind of rearranged it and reapportioned it. But he had a really huge office or space where he had a drawing board on one side, and then there was a little sitting area in the middle of it where now that I think about it, Seth and I gave our presentation for the Complete Peanuts to Jeannie, and I think Paige Braddock was there, and I think maybe one or two other people were there, and so there was a sitting area with some chairs and sofas that was there when Sparky was there drawing too. So I assume that's where he could sit down and chat. Although when I interviewed him, I actually interviewed him when he was at his drawing board.
He was working the whole time you were talking to him?
Well, you know what? I can't remember if he was actually drawing or if he was just sitting at his drawing board.
Hey, do you guys have any plans to do the Twin Pillars collections?
What is the Twin Pillars?
The
That's his.
Yeah.
You know, we don't. No. I
Do you-
mean, that would be an interesting project to do. Yeah.
Right. Do you see those as being valuable?
Well, do I see them being you mean aesthetically valuable?
I mean, just valuable as far as something that like a worthy project to take on.
Yeah. I think it's valuable in terms of, you know, as work he's done. You know, I think it's probably from a kind of scholarly point of view. I think that'd be important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's so funny that you brought up that like you should be the publisher of Peanuts. It's like you've just gone out there to interview him.
Yeah.
You said, you know what? I should publish Peanuts. I should be the one to do that. Like
I can't remember if I actually came in thinking that I would ask him that, or if it just popped into my head in the rink. I can't remember that.
Yeah, but that series set a precedent. Like now there's so many collections that even rip off the design of the Complete Peanuts. I mean,
Yeah, did you see that the first couple of volumes of the Dick Tracy
oh yeah,
series that came out that was identical? I mean, which made no sense. I mean, because it's such an utterly different strip, and it was identical to the Peanuts.
Yeah. Well, the most egregious one is the Complete Garfield. Have you seen those?
Jesus, I'm not sure I have seen those.
Oh, they ripped off completely. Same dimensions, same color schemes that Seth chose for the early hardcovers.
Wow.
It's brutal.
Well, that kind of makes sense.
It's the sincerest form of flattery, right?
Yeah. Utterly second-rate strip ripping off. Great strip.
But I think that's interesting. And did Seth do any? So all the artwork that he used in those collections was all Sparky's, right? He didn't redraw anything. Like
No, he never. Well, he redrew something once,
what was that?
and that's where we couldn't find a strip, and we had, I think, the maybe the first and second panel of the strip.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we would only have first and second panel, but we couldn't find the strip, and we asked creative associates if Seth could finish it.
Yeah.
And then we had a note somewhere in the book saying, the strip on this particular page that was in this particular date, has been finished by Seth. And they gave us permission to do that. It was either that or just run the strip as a partial strip and then just note that we couldn't find the strip. But then when the book came out, some collector came forward and had the strip. So we actually replaced it. So Seth's redrawing of that strip only appears in maybe the first printing or possibly the second. But
which of the volumes was the most popular as far as the print runs go? Maybe the first? Yeah, first.
It's always the first one.
Oh, okay. And maybe the second, it starts to trail off over time, or does it? Because Peanuts
series books always go down.
Yeah.
And then they plateau at a certain point.
How many printings have they gone into? Not the first one, but just like in general.
Well, I'm sure that they've all been reprinted at least once. The first one has probably been reprinted 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then in declining number of reprints as the volumes increase. Like volume 2, we probably are in the 3rd printing, maybe the 4th printing.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. I feel like it would go up when it gets to the years where people are more familiar with it.
Yeah, I'm kind of sorry it doesn't, because of course, the first volume isn't the best one. He was still learning how to do it. He was still creating, conceptualizing these characters and forming their personalities. So I think you could argue that the first volume is not necessarily the best Peanuts volume. And it's probably, I don't know, it could be sometime, it was good fast.
Mm-hmm.
He got good fast. But the weakest work is probably in the first volume, and that's the best-selling volume.
Yeah. What's your?
Everyone wants the first volume.
Do you have a favorite volume of Peanuts?
I don't. I love some of the stuff. I don't have a single favorite volume. There's so many different reasons to like Peanuts that I'd be hard pressed to choose any one volume. Like the 50s were so different from what came after it. Mm-hmm. And I love the 50s work for very specific reasons, and then I like work that came after it for different reasons. In the 50s, for example, you probably noticed this, he was much more visually wild. He had these unbelievable Sundays where Snoopy would be chasing after maybe Linus with a blanket or something like that, and yeah. Every panel would be like Snoopy just running, or maybe he would grab the blanket and haul yeah. Linus after him, and Linus would just be holding onto the blanket, and they would just be going from one panel to another panel, and the whole strip was like that. It was just amazing. Visually. And I think you think of Peanuts as a very staid strip with characters sitting around talking, and they're leaning against the fence and they're leaning against the brick wall and so on. And so there was a lot of really absurdist and visually inventive stuff in the 50s that he toned down later on.
Yeah.
And why he did it. He did it because he was becoming more inward, and he was exploring the inner lives of these characters more. And he just wasn't interested in doing that or whatever. But it's great that he did it. It's great that he did that in the early days. And it showed a different side of him as a cartoonist.
I just read 71 to 72.
Yeah.
And that's when he was, I guess, going through a divorce with Joyce. And it's so fascinating when you read that, because knowing that little background information, you really, that's really there every time you're reading a strip and there's Lucy, on Schroeder's piano and they're getting into a fight about something. You're like, is this a version of a real argument that he had with his wife? Like what?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he told me, either he told me or someone else. Sometimes I can't remember if he told me or some other interviewer, but He did say at one point that he did his best work when he was going through the most pain.
Hmm.
You know, that divorce, and obviously divorce can be incredibly painful, and that was some of his best work.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that Laurie Colwin, I think she asked him something like, "Is the strip you?" And he said yes. And then he elaborated on that. And of course, everybody knows, you know, that there's a little bit of every character in him. You know, that he took pieces of himself and expanded them into characters. It's not just Charlie Brown. But they have a great exchange where it's not just the characters. It's like the entire strip is him.
Mm.
And you know, when you think about it, he started the strip in 1950, and you know, one of the many things he did, and one of the things that makes Peanuts such a landmark strip is that I think he was the first cartoonist to actually put himself so directly into the strip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I assume, you know, there was something of Seagar and Popeye, and I assume there was something of McKay and Little Nemo, but there was everything about Charles Schulz in the strip. I mean, he just tapped himself.
Right. I think that's actually really valuable information for cartoonists to hear, which is he broke himself into pieces and then, you know, designated a character for each of those pieces. So mine is the religious aspect of him, you know. And
if you think about it, I mean, in the history of cartooning, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, you can go to comic books, but you know, I'm not sure if I can think. I mean, and there's some great cartoonists in the history of comic books, as well as newspaper strips, and as well as gag cartoons and political cartoons and every mode of cartooning. But I mean, I wonder if he was the first cartoonist to invest so much of himself. I mean, to transubstantiate so much of him on the page. Which you could say, you know, led into autobiographical comics that came 20, 25 years later.
Yeah, right, because he was inspiring people like we were saying earlier, Ivan Brunetti and Seth and maybe Chester Brown, Joe Matt, of course, you know.
Maybe Crumb, maybe Harvey Pekar, maybe Justin Green, yeah.
Do you know what Crumb thinks of Charles Schulz?
Yes, I did talk to Crumb about Charles. I think he likes his work, but he doesn't love it as deeply as Seth does. He likes it. You know, he says it's good work.
You know what's an interesting coincidence is that a buddy of mine sent me this book to read, and I read it. Have you seen this before? This is Claire Briggs' How to Draw Cartoons.
No, I haven't seen that.
This is the book that young Charles Schulz picked up as a boy and read and redrew all the cartoons in it. And I read this book and did like a little YouTube video about it, about like what the wisdom was of the day. And then I was reading in one of his interviews, and Charles Schulz was talking about like, oh yeah, I picked up this Claire Briggs book, How to Draw Cartoons. I was like, oh my God, that's the book I just read.
It's probably a great book, right? Because Briggs is such a good cartoonist.
Yeah, he has some pretty good insight. Yeah, I'm a big Briggs fan. I love Claire Briggs. He's one of my favorites. Is that what your main role is at this point? Is kind of editing the reprint material, or do you still take on new artists?
No. I just I just edited Barry Windsor Smith's big book, Monsters.
Oh yeah.
So and I just edited Shira Spector's book, Red Rock Baby Candy, which is coming out in February, I think. So I edit a handful of contemporary graphic novels, and then, I mean, mostly I buy books, and then we have several editors here, and I oversee them, and I know where the books are at any given time, and then they can come to me if there are any questions they can't answer. But we have several editors who, hands-on editors who push the book through the whole process, and often work with the cartoonist. So that's what I do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've never worked with you at Fantagraphics. I only ever worked with Eric.
I guess that's right. That's right. Yeah. You kind of worked for me peripherally on the Comics Journal, but I guess only peripherally.
Oh, back in the day, yeah, that's right. So
I mean, you did the interview pages.
oh yeah.
Now, did you know, Noah,
Oh
that the designer of
yes.
the journal,
He hated it.
he hated that, and I don't really know why.
Uh, so was that your job mainly to edit the Peanuts collections?
Yeah, I mean, by edit, you mean
Put them all together.
I chose the intro writers.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, the strips, I mean, every book had 2 years of strips, so I just had to pull 2 years of strips and give them to the designer, the production person, and he assembled it. And I worked with Seth. I mean, I just coordinated with Seth. Seth did all of his own designing by himself, and he just sent us all of his designs. Old school, no computer graphics. He sent them to us in the mail in hard copy, and then we translated those onto the computer.
Oh my gosh.
Now Kim worked on the Peanuts books, and Kim did the index.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think the index was Kim's idea as well.
Yeah.
And it was a good idea. I mean, he told me, he said, how about doing an index? And I said, yes, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, that was kind of a goofy idea, but it turns out to be really good. I mean, it's really helpful.
Yeah.
And he loved doing that. He loved reading the strips and writing the index. And then I chose the introduction writers for every volume.
Was that
and that was
yeah.
And that was a real trip because I had to figure out who could write these. I mean, I had to figure out it had to be a celebrity of some kind because we wanted a name. And I wanted a variety of people. So I wanted writers, musicians, filmmakers, a vast array of people in the arts, journalists. And then it was a matter of choosing, like, how do you choose, how do you choose who to approach? And I had a lot of fun doing that because a lot of the times I just approached people whose work I admired, but who I had no idea if they like Peanuts or not. So I approached Diana Krall, who's one of my favorite jazz singers, because she's one of my favorite jazz singers, not knowing if she, even read Peanuts. But sometimes it just turns out really well. Like, she said, I love Peanuts, so I'll write an introduction.
So you didn't even know, like, you weren't going off of like Jeannie saying, oh, I think this celebrity likes Peanuts.
Once in a while, but no. I mean, Jeannie suggested Billie Jean King, of course.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that, it's a no-brainer. So of course I said absolutely. But mostly no. I just, and there are a lot of celebrities I asked who said no, who didn't agree to do it.
Yeah. How do you get a hold of a celebrity?
You have to hunt down their agent, or sometimes you can find them. I mean, it's weird. Sometimes you can actually find their contact information. And I don't know. I would assign this to somebody in my office. I said, find, Jonathan Winters.
Yeah.
You know who Jonathan Winters is?
Of course, the comedian, yeah.
Okay. And I actually talked to him. And I don't know, we got his home phone number. I don't know how that happened. Or Dick Cavett. I'm thinking of people who turned us down, but Kirk Douglas. So you either find their agent, or you find them, or you find a friend.
How did you get Barack Obama to do a Peanuts intro?
We got him. We got Jake Tapper to do one. The journalist, and then I think. I don't know if I asked Jake Tapper or if someone told me that Jake Tapper would be willing to serve as a liaison between us and Barack Obama. I mean, it's possible that Jeannie or somebody at Creative Associates told us that Jake Tapper would serve as a liaison between us and Barack Obama if we wanted Obama to write an introduction. So of course I said, goddamn right we want Obama to write an introduction. So I contacted Tapper and asked him if he, could get us in there. could get us to talk to somebody, and he said yes, and he did, and we spoke to somebody who worked in the presidential office. We never talked to Barack Obama. We always talked to some middleman. That's how we got him.
And did you sit on that until the final volume?
No, we got it not too far from the publication of the final volume.
Was there a discussion when you started doing the paperback volumes to get new intros, or just to keep?
There was no such discussion. I had a discussion with myself about that, Jonathan Winter style, but
yeah,
I mean, it was really hard getting those introductions. There was a lot of work, and like I said, a lot of people turned us down, and so you had to hunt these people down, and you had to engage in a colloquy with them, and you had to try to talk them into it. And some of them just said no. I just don't think I can do it for whatever reason. I don't like the strip, or I don't have time, or or no reason at all. And so you've wasted months of time tracking this person down and going through agents and and going through layers of people, because they have layers of of resistance. So it's a lot of work to get people to write introductions. So I just thought there was just no way I could do that for 26 more times.
Are you going to do a paperback edition of the final volume, which is just like the bonus material?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What was was there a discussion at all about keeping the Seth design for the paperback?
No, I think, well, there was not really a discussion. I think I always wanted to change it up.
Okay.
Make the paperback different and radically different, which it is, of course.
And who does the designs on the paperback?
Oh, that's Jacob Covey.
Oh, okay, yeah. He's
no, we wanted to distinguish it from the hardcovers, and we wanted to go in a radically different direction. Kind of a whole different side. I mean, Seth has his very specific take on Peanuts, and that's reflected in his design.
Very dour,
and that's and I think that's legitimate, and I think that's his perception of Peanuts, but it's not the entirety of Peanuts. So we also wanted to have that, poppier, more joyous side of Peanuts.
Yeah, which is more classic to the other. Well, I mean, of course, it's better. It looks better than the past Peanuts collections, but they're always. It's so weird too. You ever see those like other Peanuts collections where it's like they do the strips on the page, and then behind it will be like a bunch of dots or something, or like they just can't just have like strips on a page. They got to do something with the background.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, they're hideous. Yeah.
What are you doing? It's like I'm trying to read this comic strip, and then you get all this shit happening here, and it's like trying to get my attention. I don't understand it.
Well, they're trying to appeal to idiots, I guess.
Yeah.
People who just need lots of color and split. I mean, it's not about the strip.
Right.
And when we started publishing Peanuts, Peanuts had become this gigantic, it was this gigantic marketing phenomenon. And one thing I thought when I talked to Sparky about this in his rink, I don't think I told him this, but I thought the strip was actually being eclipsed by all the marketing, the stuffed toys and the beach balls and all this stuff. And so one of my goals was to emphasize and even like reintroduce the strip to people who wanted to read the strip.
Yeah.
Or people who didn't even know there was a strip. All they knew was that there were Peanuts blankets and Peanuts hats, and so I wanted to get the strip out there in a way that people could really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And so all these books with with all this crap in it. It's not about the strip. It's about, I don't know.
It's merchandise.
It's about, the books are almost a form of merchandise. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that part in the interview when he's telling you this story about how he was like in a cartooning class when he was 17, and there was this beautiful young girl there and also taking the class, and he was like, oh my gosh, like he was trying to impress her, but there was like some other guy who was like drawing like a Bugs Bunny ripoff, and he was kind of getting her attention. And finally, the teacher of the class like realized that Charles was really good at lettering. So he shows the girl, like, look at Charles's lettering. And she's like really impressed. He's like, yeah, all right. And you're like, oh, congratulations. And he goes, well, now she's dead. He's like, oh.
You remember that? Yeah, that was good.
Now she's dead. It's just like, geez, man, come on.
Yeah, and as I recall, he said that very resignedly.
Yeah.
I mean, as if it wasn't just her that was dead, but that things were dying. I mean, things were.
Right. Because he kept track of people that were in his youth that were passed away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he definitely had a melancholic streak,
Mm-hmm.
and I think death was, a part of that.
Have you read every one of the strips while working on the books?
The last decade, I did not read every strip, and I keep meaning to actually get all 5 books and just go through them, because I've done that with each decade. I've actually gotten all 5 books, and I would just sit and read each decade, and I haven't done that with the 90s yet. I feel like I'm kind of holding back because I still want Peanuts to read that I haven't. I mean, I read some of them, I kind of poked in there and read some of them, but I just haven't actually read it all from beginning to end. And I feel like I'm just kind of holding that in day.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm wondering about why he switched from a 4-panel grid to a 3-panel daily strip.
Well, I think that might have had something to do with the newspaper requirements, like the dimensions changed.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And I think that he did that in order to give himself more space per panel. I think.
And he started using a Zipatone too at a certain point.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think that I'm not sure it was Zipatone. I think it was a rub-on. Maybe yeah.
Yeah, that stuff sucks, man. All that. When I first got into cartooning, you could still find Zipatone and stuff like that at the art store, but it was like dusty, and nobody was touching it anymore. And I tried to use it just because I was really interested in that classic comic stuff, and it would get everywhere, man. You would find pieces of it like stuck to your sock.
I used Zipatone a lot, in the early days of the Comics Journal. I would cut the separations of the covers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And there were like 10 layers, and so each layer, I'd have Zipatone. There'd be Ruby Lith for 100%, and there'd be various degrees of Zipatone. You'd have to cut it, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Zipatone, little pieces of Zipatone be everywhere.
Yeah. So after you had the rights to just do all the complete Peanuts, that you also just kind of had to go ahead to do like little Peanuts books, like?
No. They're all separate contracts. So if I want to do another book, or if I have an idea for another book, like we did a book called Snoopy versus the Red Baron a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I submit a proposal, and they agree to it or don't agree to it, and then we can do another book.
Do you have any that you're working on now?
We do have a few theme books that I proposed, and so we don't have a contract for them, so I shouldn't talk too much about them. But yeah, we do have a handful of theme books that we're working on. Oh, by the way, I congratulations on getting married.
Oh, thank you.
You got married, didn't you?
Yep, I did. Yeah. Yeah, it's
one step ahead of me.
I beat you to it.
Good luck with that.